So I'm going to copy SPY, returns for SPY, GLD, and BND. Uh, let's go to SPY. I need control find 04/16/2007. Okay. Get the returns from that date on. Same thing with gold. Come on. Control F brings up this find and replace so that I can directly go there. And finally on BND, we already have everything we want here. Okay. Remember, these are weekly returns. I'm going to insert one line at the top, and I'm going to type weights. I'm going to put in arbitrary weights, but these are numbers, not percentages. One thing about portfolio weights, they have to add up to 1. So the last one is going to be calculated as 1 minus some of the previous ones. Oops, I wanted to make that purple. So if the first one is actually 0.30, the last one becomes 0.30. Okay, and I'm going to calculate the weights for the returns for the portfolio given those weights. As you have seen here, it is sum of a number of products, right? And we actually have a function for that in Excel. It is called sum product. It does what the name says it does. It sums products. Sum product of the weights. Since I'm going to use the same set of weights for all the dates, I'm going to hit F4 and make them absolute reference. And that one. So on the week of April 16th, 2007, this specific portfolio made 1.33%. I'm gonna give that a color as well. The rest, I just copied them. Now let's do some stats for these things. So what's the average return historically? And at least, the last 16 years or so. So on average, S&P 500 made you about 0.20 per week. That's not a small number. I mean, If you compound that over a year, that's 10.71% over a year. Okay, just drag these. Let's call this annual. Let's call this average weekly. I'm going to calculate this annual one just for the average, just to see. As you can see, they have different returns. During that period, bonds yielded about less than 3%, which is not terribly surprising. There are two periods where bond returns were extremely low. The period after the 2008 crash and the period after COVID lockdowns. Gold, in the meantime, did something relatively in the middle. So even during these times, stock markets did a lot better than the others. Does that mean that we should go ahead and invest everything into stock market, assuming this sort of stuff is going to represent the patterns in the future? Remember, when you calculate these, you're calculating statistics based on past. If you make investment decisions based on these, your implicit assumption is future is going to look like the past. Whether or not that's true, that's a separate argument. But in the absence of any other model we have at this point, that's how we're going to look at it. So should we go ahead and necessarily invest everything in the stock market and not anything into commodities, which are kind of represented here by the GLT and bond market? Just tell me your opinion. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. This is investment. There is no wrong opinions. There are only uneducated opinions. Given this, would you put everything into the stock market? Why? Okay. So the only measurement, the only criteria you have is what you could make. Yeah. Okay. So no, that portfolio is already diversified. Don't worry about that. I mean, it is a single stock, but the way that stock is traded, it represents the performance of a portfolio that has 500 stocks in it. You know, if price of that stock deviates too much from the portfolio that represents the index, the company that runs the ETF actually comes in. If the ETF is too high, they come in and create new shares and sell them. If it's too low, they come in and buy existing shares. So they actually regulate that price. It's not an exact correspondence, but it's very close. So SPY by itself would be a diversified portfolio. But you're kind of hitting at something that we should think about. In addition to thinking about what we could make, we should also worry about how about what we could lose, okay? So we're going to look at something like risk. As measured by standard deviation, which is not necessarily my favorite measure of risk, but it is so common. And function in Excel for that is stdev. just stdev and the returns. The units of standard deviation are the same as the regular return, so I can actually write it as such. And it's actually pretty high numbers. These asset returns are not technically normally distributed, but they have the general shape that looks like a bell-shaped curve with some variations. But when distribution is off that form, there's kind of a rule. It's not a rule, but it's kind of a rule of thumb, the empirical rule. It's kind of a misnomer. There is nothing empirical about it, and it's not even a rule, but it's called empirical rule. About 95% of the asset returns should lie within 2 standard deviations of the average. That means somewhere between negative 2.4 and, I'm sorry, negative 5.3 and negative 5.1 and positive 5.1, 5.3. But remember, these are weekly returns. Those are huge numbers. So the risk is pretty big. We could actually look at fifth percentile and 95th percentile.